Okay, so today what we will do is we will go through some of the important mining concepts related to mining. So this lecture is basically focused on the mining fundamentals, right? And also on the proof of work, like the detailed proof of work algorithm, how it works, and also about hash difficulty and other kinds of things. We will look into some of the technicalities. Since we are only we only have class for 1 hour, so we will cover part of the things and we will continue sometime later this week or something like that. So first, I will talk about Bitcoin economics and also about distributed consensus. As I was telling before, in case of centralized system, you have somebody to take care of the trust, like the bank and other kinds of things, and how cryptocurrencies will achieve this distributed consensus. And then we will look into some of the basics in the Bitcoin mining, especially cryptocurrency mining, and then some important stuff about what is hash difficulty, how is hash difficulty defined, and how to calculate the hash difficulty, and how the miners will miners will comply with this hash difficulty and try to find a hash value which is lesser than the hash difficulty and other kinds of things. And mining hardware and mining pools, some discussion about mining pools and things like that. So let us see how far we go with 1 hour, and then we can continue the rest later. So when it comes to the economics, Bitcoin, when you compare with some fiat currencies, it has some special interesting properties and things like that. So we need to understand the economics around the Bitcoin, especially it is similar to a fiat currency in terms of having the value and things like that, but it had its own economic ecosystem and things like that, which is beyond the control of many governments and stuff like that. So let us look into some of the basic economics, tokenomic economics around the Bitcoin. So first of all, let us look into what is mining, right? So the purpose of the mining in the cryptocurrencies is not only to create new coins. It is more than that. It's a kind of incentive system to make sure that the things are going fine according to the rules in the Bitcoin or in any cryptocurrency. So moreover, mining is a mechanism by which Bitcoin security is decentralized and also guaranteed. What does it mean? So in a sense, the beauty of the cryptocurrencies, especially the Bitcoin, is that the inbuilt security is also linked to mining in somehow, which might not be true for many cryptocurrencies, which are just starting out and things like that. But at least the Bitcoin has achieved that, you can say, a big threshold. So even to hack or produce attacks on the Bitcoin, you need huge amount of computing power and things like that. Somehow, the mining and the security are intertwined in the design of Bitcoin, which is one of the very good features, you can say. Of course, there are several bad effects of the mining and other kinds of things, because you spend a lot of energy unnecessarily. We'll see more in the lecture and things like that. But whatever it may be, but it's the mining and security are intertwined, and it is the mining in some sort provides security for the cryptocurrency as well. So, and miners validate new transactions and they record on the global ledger. So they verify the transaction, if the transaction is valid or not. We have seen how the transactions work in the previously, like whether the transaction is not unspent, not spent before, and all other validation checks. It is not a double spend transaction and things like that. All these checks will be performed, and the transactions will be recorded on the global ledger. And especially Bitcoin has some interesting rules. It has some constraints on how frequent a block can be produced. So, for example, a new block containing transactions can be occurred. So, in every 10 minutes, that is the on average, you will we try to see that the time to produce a new block is 10 minutes. So, what happens is all the miners they will compete for making the block, and the miner whoever got who solves this hash puzzle and who can create a block, how the block is created. So we collect all the unspent transactions and put them into a block, and then they try to chase this hash puzzle, and whenever they solve the hash puzzle, they will immediately make the block and put it in the network, right? So that's how the mining works. But somehow we try to keep it that every new block is produced approximately in 10 minutes time. And let's see how that is also maintained later and things like that. So in terms of the rewards, so miners receive two types of rewards. Again, it depends upon the cryptocurrency to cryptocurrency. It might change from cryptocurrency to cryptocurrency. But if you take Bitcoin as an example, so the miners receive two sorts of rewards. One is the new coins, each with each new block they produce. Initially, it was 50 bitcoins, but now it got reduced. And the another way of reward mechanism for miners is the transaction fees. We have seen that the transactions can leave some money. You can say transaction fee or tip and things like that. So if the input value of the transaction and if the output value of the transaction they differ, if the input is bigger than the output, then that is collected as the transaction fee. So these are the two types of incentives the miners will get by making the block, right? So when it comes to the creating new coins, so Bitcoin has an interesting design. So they regulate the number of coins you can produce in the Bitcoin. So, for example, as per the initial design, at least by 2040, there will be no block rewards. So that means if you create a new block, you won't get any new coins. The reason why they put that constraint on the design is that they want to regulate the number of coins you can create. Again, taking the example from the fiat currencies, in case of fiat currencies, you don't have any restriction how many notes you can print. But of course, the government regulates that one and things like that. And we have seen that that is one of the reasons why the governments always try to fund their deficit budgeting by printing more and more notes and more currency and things like that. So that's one of the reasons why the initial designers of the Bitcoin, they thought that, okay, the total number of the coins, they cannot exceed 20 million Bitcoins. And the way they controlled it is the block reward, which started with 50 Bitcoins in 2009 when it started, 2009 or 2009 when it started. And it gets reduced to half by every 4 years. So gradually the mining reward will be reduced, and I think the current mining reward is around 6.25 Bitcoins. So that means that whenever the miners produce a new block, they will only get 6.25 Bitcoins worth. And again, when in the next iteration, it will reduce to 3.1 something like that, right? So 3.125 or something like that. But so gradually the mining reward is decreasing. The reward for the new block is decreasing, the number of new coins you can create. But on the other hand, there is a steady increase in the transaction fees. So people started giving the transaction fee, even though it is not very stipulated. Remember, if you want your transaction to be part of the block, then you need to leave some transaction fee. Otherwise, what happens is it will it will take a long time to put them, get it to a current block and things like that. Okay, so we will see some of the economics around the Bitcoin, and especially looking into the deflation human, right? So the most important concept is of the fixed and diminishing monetary issuance. So what does it mean? So that means we say that the total number of coins in the Bitcoin is 20,000. 20 million. And then we also say that the monetary value of the number of coins you create for the new block is decreasing, diminishing every 4 years and things like that. So the side effect of this design is it tends to create the currency to deflate, right? So the currency tend to deflate. What is deflation? Deflation is a phenomenon when consumer asset prices decrease over the time and the purchasing power of the currency increases. So what does it mean? Suppose, let us say, if you have we have our 500 rupees, right? Let's say we have a 500 rupees note in our hand, and if we are in the phase of inflation, the value of the money in our hand will decrease over the period of time, right? So if I don't do anything, if I keep this 500 into a box and keep it, and if I open it for after 2 years, the value of the money will decrease because you have a 10% inflation every year or something like that. On the other hand, deflation is a phenomenon where the value of the money increases over the period of time. Normally, we don't see deflation that long, but it actually increases the purchasing power of the money, or you can say indirectly, the value of the goods and services will decrease, or you can say the price of the goods and services will decrease over the time. So that is the deflationary phenomenon. So deflation is normally happens due to the mismatch between the supply and demand. So that means there is a huge supply of products, and the demand for the products is less. Then the prices will go down, right? So we will see normally this phenomena in the real estate market. Not only in India, every country is susceptible to this one. The real estate prices are always sometimes they are not very stable. So sometimes when the markets are doing good, the real estate prices they go up and things like that. But let us say that due to some external conditions like the recession and other kinds of things, that people will stop buying houses, right? People will stop buying houses and lands because this is not an immediate commodity necessity for them, and then the prices will fall down, right? So this is some kind of deflationary phenomenon, mostly associated with the real estate and other kinds of the properties and things like that. So deflation is an opposite phenomena. It means that the power of the purchasing power of the money actually increases. Is it not a good phenomenon? Definitely, it's not a good phenomenon because many economists suggest that deflationary economy is a disaster. So that should be avoided at all costs. Inflation is you can say a slow poison kind of thing. So your money lose value over the period of years and things like that. But on the other hand, when you have the deflation, it can lead to huge financial crisis and things like that. So, and what happens in case of deflation? People stop spending money, so they keep the money in the safes. So they keep the money without spending, and they try to save the money. And instead of spending, so there will be a lot of saving, either in the bank accounts or in some sort of physical cash or something like that. And the reason for that is since the prices are falling, and the purchase power of the money will increase, right? For example, let me again take the real estate. If you want to buy a house, let's say that we are in the deflationary, the housing market prices are in the deflationary mode, decreasing mode. So that means the prices of the houses will go down over the years, right? So then probably you don't want to buy immediately, because you can buy immediately, but on the other hand, if the prices are going in the decreasing trend, maybe if you hold your money and if you buy your apartment of 1 year, you will get much better price, or you can say much better apartment than what you can afford as of now, right? So that's the kind of deflation phenomena where people will stop spending money, and which is bad for the economy, because the side effect of not spending money is that the businesses, they don't get money. So many of the businesses, they work, they survive on people spending money, because when you buy and sell and when you do transactions, then the businesses will get money because they get commission on it. On the other hand, if people don't spend money, also the governments will suffer. Let's say that people stop spending money and saving, they go in the mode of saving money. So the number of transactions will reduce, and the tax on these transactions, the government won't get any tax. Right? So it will be a big loss for the governments as well. So deflation is a very dangerous phenomenon, at least according to the economists and things like that. So such a phenomena unfolded, we have seen in the history, especially Japan. During the period of 1991 and 2000, we normally call this as the last decade. So what happened is Japan was doing pretty good before the years 70s and 80s. It was really booming a lot of car manufacturing companies and things like that. So its economy is really doing very well. It has a growth rate of around 4%, which is very high for a very advanced nation, right? Like one of the developed nations, and it is much higher the rate than the US and things like that. But what happened in 90s is they went into the deflationary mode because of some you can say mistakes or whatever it may be. The central banks failed to make corrections and things like that. And then what happened is the prices starts falling down, right? So and then the economy went into slow growth. So their growth rate has fallen from around 4% to 1% and things like that. So it's a kind of a stagnation. But yeah, it gave a lot of bad experience for the economy, and it took almost 10 years to get out of it. So that's why people will always refer to this Japan's lost decade. You can search for it and you will get more information about what is Japan's lost decade and things like that. So, in a sense, if you ask the economists, so they say that deflation is a bad phenomenon. So people should the economy should not enter into deflation. So that's why the governments and central banks try to push more money and other kinds of things so that the economists won't into deflationary mode and things like that. But on the other hand, if you ask the Bitcoin expert, they say that deflation is not as bad as per se. Of course, deflation caused by the collapse in the demand. So when there is a collapse in the demand, then the prices will fall and things like that. And that is a very bad example of the deflation. But on the other hand, if the deflation happens because you have some kind of regulation, and that is not you can say it's a bad example. That's not going to harm a lot and things like that. So in fiat currencies, the possibility of unlimited printing. So the governments, they are at free will to print a lot of money without much regulation and things like that. So it is very difficult to enter into the deflationary spiral. So that's why the governments, what they do is, if the economy is slowing down, and then they try to pump more money. So what they do is they will print more money So the government will have more money at its hands to spend, and then they will declare so many schemes so that people will get money and things like that. For example, reducing the income tax, or giving some sort of direct benefits to the people and things like that. So in a way, it is good. It try to prevent the disparity spiral, but on the other hand, then it can also bring inflation and things like that, right? So in case of normal economies, deflation can only happen if there is a all of the sudden collapse in the demand, and also the governments don't want to print money. So this can happen in those scenarios. But in deflation in Bitcoin is not caused by the collapse in the demand, but also on the other hand, it is caused by the predictable constraint supply. So the number of Bitcoins you can produce is limited. So that's why the price of the Bitcoin is increasing. Or you can say the price of the purchase power of the Bitcoin is increasing because there is a growing demand for the number of coins. But on the other hand, the number of coins you can produce is very constrained by these rules. So the positive effect of deflation is that it of opposite of inflation. So value of the currency increases. And again, one more thing is, as I told you before, inflation, it's like a slow poison, right? So because the inflation happens and you didn't realize, so money will be the money will go into the value of the money will reduce and things like that. And normally what the governments will do is they will debase the currency. So what does it mean? Let's say that we have 100 rupees, right? And then we have a steady inflation over the several years. So the value of the 100 rupees will get down to 10 rupees or something like that. And then rather than saying that the value is very low, they will make the correction to the currency so that the value of the currency is fixed at 10 rupees. This is not a new phenomenon. This, of course, probably it didn't happen in India, but in many countries this happened. They try to debase the currency so that you can bail out from the debitors and things like that. So, for example, the government can wipe off a lot of money it owe to the people and things like that. Okay, so the currencies under the control of the government, so things can happen, but yeah. So in a sense, um, inflation inflation make the people suffer who have who save the money and things like that, right? At the expense of the other people and things like that. So it is seen. It has to be seen whether the deflation is a problem, especially in the Bitcoin, or is it an advantage because it protects from the inflation and debasement of the currency and things like that. Of course, I'm not talking about the volatility of the currency and things like that. Volatility is something different. So the price of the Bitcoin goes to 67,000, 70,000, and then drops to 20,000. These are different kinds of things. But a growth of the value of the currency, which is seen as whether it's good or whether it's great harm and things like that. Okay, so let's look into any questions so far. Okay, so if you don't have any questions, then let's go further, decentralized consensus. So in case of public ledgers, just one second. So in case of the cryptocurrencies, we know that we have a public ledger, right? So we have a public ledger of all the transaction. And so what does it decentralized consensus means? So decentralized consensus indicate that everyone in the network accepts the authoritative record of ownership. What does it mean? So every node in the network, they agrees on who owns which coins, right? In a sense that even though the nodes, they communicate and there is no direct communication between them, they communicate over the network and things like that. But there is some sort of the consensus that is achieved regarding who owns what, right? So, but how can everyone in the network agrees on a single universal about who owns what and without having to trust anyone? So the beauty of it is here, people don't know each other. You can say the miners, they don't have direct any relationship and things like that, and there is no central authority who is actually mediating these transactions and things like that. There is no one central authority who says which transaction is right, which transaction is double spent and things like that. But on the other hand, all the nodes, they, based on some communication, they come to a single truth, you can say universal truth, and without having any trust between them. So if you again compare with this traditional payment mechanism, the traditional payment mechanisms, they work on a trust mode, basic model. So where you have a central authority, so you have a bank and you believe the bank. And since the bank, we know that a bank don't do wrongs, are trustworthy. And the bank, it is the bank which provides these clearing services. So for example, verifying the transactions and clearing the transactions and things like that. So as long as we have trust in the bank, and then all the things are taken care, right? So, but in case of Bitcoin, we don't have any central authority. And yet somehow every full node, all the nodes who are doing mining, they have a complete copy of the public ledger that it can trust as an authoritative record. Here we have to understand that there is no one who is telling us which is the complete, which is the authoritative complete copy of the public ledger, right? So we have the public ledger, which is the Bitcoin chain, you can say. There is no one who is saying that which is the current authoritative copy and things like that. On the other hand, all the nodes, they will come to the same conclusion about what is the current state of the public ledger, right? You can say that the authoritative record of the transactions. Let's see how this the consensus is achieved. So here we have to understand that the chain of blocks in the Bitcoin is not created by the central authority, but it is assembled in such a way independently. It is assembled independently by every node in the network, and the good part is using some simple tools. All the nodes will come to the same state of the final state, right? So every node in the network acts on the information transmitted across the insecure network connection. So sometimes that you can have the network disruptions and things like that, but based on the information that is transmitted in the network, they will arrive at the same conclusion. And without having any central authority, they will try to assemble a copy of the same public ledger as everyone else. So this is where the consensus mechanism comes into play. In the next module, we will look into the consensus mechanism and how the consensus is achieved. And we will go more into the technical details, for example, Byzantine fault-tolerant systems, and how Bitcoin achieves the consensus. Bitcoin has a different consensus mechanism. Probabilistic finality, we normally call it as. So there is no absolute consensus, but on the other hand, the consensus is achieved over the time by the probabilistic time and things like that. So this is the it boils down to the consensus mechanism, which will come to it later. So the process by which the Bitcoin attains this consensus without the involvement of the central party, or you can say central actor, is emerging. And we call this as the emergent consensus. So the designers of the Bitcoin, the main invention is this decentralized mechanism for the emergent consensus. Why do we say emergent consensus? Because the consensus, what is consensus? The consensus about what is the latest copy of the ledger, right? So every node, let's say that all the nodes, they will participate in the mining, and every node, they will try to construct this longest chain, or you can say the copy of the public ledger, by adding the new nodes and new blocks and things like that. And the consensus make sure, decentralized consensus make sure that all of them, they are naked, something like that. And we call this as emergent because there is no fixed consensus. What does it mean? The consensus is not achieved by the election, like people vote for it, which is the latest block and things like that. And based on the voting, they decide which block is the latest. So this is some sort of the consensus mechanism adopted by the other blockchains. Or you can say that there is a fixed movement saying that when the consensus occurs. So in case of Bitcoin, the consensus are emergent in the nature. Instead of that, the consensus in the Bitcoin is an emerging artifact that is produced from the asynchronous interactions of thousands of independent nodes. So what does it mean? So the consensus is achieved, you can say, emergent in the nature, and this will happen based on the interactions between thousands of independent nodes, transmitting the transactions and also transmitting the blocks and things like that. So the properties of the Bitcoin, including the currency, transaction payments, and they don't rely on any central authority. But on the other hand, the main trust is derived from the invention of the simple rules about the mining, which we'll see later. And also, having only the rules does not will not be sufficient, because you might have rules and people start breaking the rules and things like that. But on the other hand, it also has the beautiful design of motivating all the miners to follow these simple rules. So that is the main success for these achieving this emergent decentralized consensus. So Bitcoin has simple rules for mining, and also it motivates all the miners to behave honestly. Otherwise, they don't get any incentive. So that is where this perfect synchrony happens, and that's why this mechanism is working, right? So it's important to have the rules and also have the mechanism in place so that all the nodes will follow honestly these rules. Okay, so let's see how far we are doing, and we have to stop at in 20-25 minutes, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to a few slides, and let's then we will stop at the hash difficulty and things like that. So let's look into how the decentralized consensus is achieved, right? So Bitcoin's decentralized consensus emerges from the interplay between four processes, you can say, that occur independently on the nodes across the network. So all the nodes who participate in the mining, they follow these different processes, and the consensus is emerged or achieved during between the interplay of these processes. Let's look into them one by one. So independent verification of each transaction by each full node based on the comprehensive list of criteria. So what happens is, whenever there is a new transaction, all the nodes will verify whether the transaction is valid or not. So that means node cannot believe that the transaction is valid. They have to verify it themselves according to a set of rules. For example, the coins included in the transaction, they are not double spent, and the total value of the input and output, they should match and things like that. All these rules, they will be followed, and each transaction will be verified by all the nodes, right? So every full node will do the verification of the transaction. And independent aggregation of those transactions are put into new block. So the nodes will collect these independent unspent transactions. Let's call it as unspent transactions. So the transactions which are not spent before, which are not double spent, these independent aggregation of the transactions will happen. What does it mean? Every node will have their own set of independent transactions which they want to put into block, right? So for example, let's say that you have a miner A and miner B. Let's say that both the miners are working on creating the new block, right? And let's say that for the sake of simplicity, each block contains 100 transactions, right? And if you try to compute the intersection between the transactions which the miner A is trying to put into block and the transactions which the miner B is trying to put into the block, they are not exactly the same. So, for example, you might see in maybe hardly 50% of the transactions might be overlapping. But on the other hand, each node will have their own set of transactions. And this happens because you have what every node will do is every node will collect all the unspent transactions, and then based on the set of rules, they will verify the transaction, and they will add these unspent transactions to the valid transactions, which need to be put into the block, right? So nodes might have different set of transactions because, again, the transactions are transmitted into the network. So, for example, one miner node might have seen a transaction X, but maybe the other node, let's say the miner node B, it might not have seen the transaction because it is still in the network and things like that, right? So that means the list of unspent transactions at the nodes will vary, no doubt about it. So that means the transactions which the miners try to put into the block, it will differ from the node to node. So every node will try to put a set of transactions into the new block, and then it will try to demonstrate this computation that it has solved this proof of work puzzle and things like that. And then once it is done, it will create a new block. So let's say that one miner has created new block and put it in the network. So independent verification of new blocks and assembly into the chain of nodes. So all the nodes, what they do is, let's imagine that there is a new block which is released in the network. So, and then whenever people see the new block, the nodes see the new block, all the nodes in the network, they will make verification of the new block. What kind of checks they do? First of all, they see that all the transactions in the block are valid or not, and whether the transaction hash value, whether it respects the constraints, whether it respects the hash difficulty imposed at that time, right? So the hash value of the block, which should be less than the hash difficulty specified by the network. So all these verifications will be done, and then what they do is, okay, if the new block passes all these verifications, then it will be simply added to the existing chain of blocks, and they will put this as the last block, right? So this is the latest block. They will simply add it to the existing chain of blocks and things like that. And then independent selection by every node of the chain with the most computation. So we normally call as the longest chain, right? So, and all the nodes, they will somehow come to the conclusion saying that which is the longest chain of the block. Again, we will see when we come to the consensus algorithm, that is not how things will work, right? So for example, let's say that two nodes, let's say that we have 100 mining nodes in the network, and two nodes, every mining node is trying to make a block. let's imagine that two nodes, they produce the block simultaneously, approximately in the same time, maybe in a fraction of seconds or something like that. Both the nodes will will distribute their blocks into the network and things like that. And let's say that some of the nodes, they have seen the block created by the miner A, and some of the nodes, they have seen the block created by the new block created by the miner B, right? So as per the rules, they will check the block and both the blocks are valid. And the nodes which have seen this new block A, they will add that to the longest chain. Whereas the miners which have seen the block B, then they will add it to the chain. So now you will have a conflict in the chain and things like that. So, but somehow again that boils down to the consensus mechanism and things like that. Somehow they will achieve this longest chain prevail rule over the period of time. So we will discuss those things when we come to the consensus mechanism, how the conflicts are resolved, and what happens when you are in a side chain, you can say, on a chain which is not the longest and things like that. Let me just recap what we have discussed about the transactions. Last week we have discussed that in detail about the transactions, how they are verified and things like that. So we have two types of things, locking script and unlocking script. A locking script is nothing but putting conditions on the spending, right? So putting constraint on the spending and things like who could use these coins and things like that. And unlocking script is, we call it as the script signature. So which is nothing but trying to satisfy the conditions of the conditions specified in the by the locking script, right? So unlocking script tries to solve or satisfies the conditions placed on the locking script, and then if both will tally, then the transaction is valid, right? So it is called the script signature and script public key. We have seen all these things beforehand. So how the independent transactions are verified? So what will happen is, let's imagine that you are spending your coins, right? So basically you are trying to create a transaction. Your wallet tries to create a transaction by creating the unlocking script. Why unlocking script? You have a coin and you are trying to spend the coin. And for example, let's say that you bought a cup of coffee with Bitcoin, right? And you're trying to pay it to the coffee vendor, and then unlocking script will be generated, and this transaction is put into the network. It will be sent to the neighboring nodes in the network to propagate across the network. So this transaction will be propagated to the network. And every node verifies the transaction against the checklist of criteria. So we have a long list of criteria, like the transaction of the transaction and data structure must be correct, and the transaction size in the bytes is less than the maximum block size, and many kinds of things, right? So, and the transaction size is greater than 100 bytes and things like that. So, and the transaction is valid in the sense that the inputs referred in the transaction, they are not double spent, and all these things will be verified. Some of the interesting rules we can see, for example, for each input, if the reference output transaction is a coin-based transaction, it must have at least coin-based maturity of 100 confirmations. What does it mean? Let's say that we are miners. We got we created the the block, and we got the block reward, right? So you get some coins, right? So these coins, which are created in the block, they cannot be spent for the next 100 blocks. Why why this constraint? This is called the coin-based maturity. So that means at any point of time, you can spend your coins, which got in the coin-based transaction, only after 100 acknowledgements of the blocks and things like that. This is the reason is that you can end up in conflicts in the longest chain, and to resolve the longest chain conflicts and things like that. So this enforcement, this constraint has been enforced and things like that. So we call this normally coin-based maturity. So if the inputs are less than 100 confirmations, inputs are from the coin-based output, and if it's less than 100 confirmations, then this will simply disregard the transaction. So all these checks will be done by the miners while verifying the transactions. So, and how does they put the transactions into the block? So after validating all the transactions, a Bitcoin node will add them to the memory pool. We call this as memory pool. So basically, you can see think that it's a kind of list containing all the valid transactions, which is normally also called the transaction pool, where the transactions will wait until they are included in the block. And nodes collect and validate relay new transactions. So it will happen as a parallel process. On one hand, nodes will receive the new transaction. And whenever they receive the new transaction, they will verify the transactions and add it to this valid transaction list, or you can say set of transactions, or you can say transaction pool. And at the same time, nodes are also trying to create a new block. So they will take the transactions from this transaction pool, which contain valid transaction, and put them into a block and try to create the block header and create a new block as soon as possible by solving this hash puzzle. And meanwhile, let's say that you are a bit unlucky and you are not able to solve the hash puzzle. And let's say that all of a sudden there is a new block in the network. That means some other miner who has created the block, right? And now we have the new block in the miner. Whenever a miner sees this new block, then he will dump all the work so far he has done, because remember, he collected all the transactions in a new block and trying to solve this puzzle. He will stop all this work and dump all those transactions, because you don't know whether these transactions are part of this new block and things like that. Then he will start immediately. First of all, he will verify whether the block is valid or not. Like the block is the block hash value follows these hash difficulties constraints, and also all the transactions in the new block are valid. If everything checks valid, then he will stop immediately the block creation and remove all the transactions from the new block, and then he will start from scratch again. So the reason is, even if you have, let's say that why don't you continue the work, right? Because you already have, let's say that you put 100 transactions into a block and try to create the hash, try to solve the hash puzzle and things like that. What happens if one of the transaction is already included in the new block, and the new block is already generated, so it will be part of the longest chain, and the transaction which you are trying to put into your block will be a double spend transaction. So that's why whenever you see a new block, you dump all the block creation, and you will start from scratch. Scratch means what? So again, update your transaction pool, saying that which are valid transactions. So that means you will remove all the transactions which are already part of this new block, only have the transactions which are unspent, and then take some transactions from this unspent transaction pool and again start making the block. So this whole process, in case of Bitcoin, you will see a new block of every 10 minutes. So that means every 10 minutes, one new block is generated. And if you are not able to get any block, then you will all the work you have done is wasted. So there are 6 steps, you can say, easy steps. So for example, let's say that you want to do Bitcoin mining. So what do? So you will join the network and listen for the transactions. Of course, you have to download the software and things like that. So, and you start validating all the proposed transactions. You collect all the transactions and make sure that all the transactions will follow the checks and things like that. At the same time, listen for the new blocks and maintain your own copy of the blockchain. Whenever you see a new block, a valid block, then you will add it to your chain and things like that. So assemble a new valid block, and in parallel, you also try to create a new block and things like that, and find the nonce to make up your block is valid and things like that. If you are lucky, you got this puzzle hash value, then create a new block and release into the network, right? And hope that everyone will accept your block as a valid block and add it to their chain, and then you will get money. So these are the simple steps which happens in the mining. But look into this, for example, all the work is done by the miners. For example, validating the transactions. In case of traditional banking, it is the bank who is validating all the transactions, right? And the validating the blocks and assembling a new valid block and all these things, they are being conducted by the miners to maintain the network and things like that. Okay, so remember when I was talking about the transaction structure, I was referring to especially these two values. Of course, you have the transaction hash, output index, and many kinds of things. But I want to focus on these two parts, right? So in case of coin-based transaction, what is a coin-based transaction? This is a transaction where you will create new coins and things like that. You have the sequence number, right? And this sequence number is used to actually create the new block and things like that. Let's see how that is done and in a minute. So let's say that we have, let's say that we are collected all the transactions and put them into Merkle tree. And then since we are creating a new block, and now the block reward is 6.25 Bitcoins and things like that. So we create a coin-based transaction with this one, and also put as the first transaction in the transaction graph, and you prepare all the Merkle tree, and you prepare the header and the Merkle tree hash value and everything, and then you will start computing the hash, right? How do you do it? So you have the nonce here. You first start with zeros, and then you compute the whole hash value of the header. And then let's say that you don't reach this threshold, you will change the nonce value. And whenever you change the nonce value, the value of the data will change. Remember, even if you change 1 bit in the hash value, 1 bit in the data, the whole hash value will change. So again, you compute the hash value. Again, we compute the hash value. You simply keep on increasing the nonce for a time, right? So remember, the nonce is 4 bit. So that means only you can go up to a certain value, I think 32,000 and things like that. And then what happens? And even then, you didn't get this hash value under the threshold. Then what you do? You will go here and you will go to the coin-based transaction. And in the coin-based transaction, we have the sequel number, right? So which is used as a nonce. Then you will start increasing that sequence number. So in the sequence number, you will start putting 1. Previously it is zeros. Now you start putting 1. And remember, whenever you change this coin-based transaction, the whole graph will change, because you are changing this transaction, coin-based transaction, and the hash value will change, and all the hash values will keep on changing, and including the Merkle root will also change. So you have to recompute all the hash graph again. So again, you will compute the Merkle root, and then start doing the computation, and then what happens? Let's say you keep on trying and things like that, and again we will start increasing the nonce here, and you will go up to the last value. This is the 4-bit value, 32,000, and then you don't get it, and then you will come back and you will again update the coin-based transaction. Luckily, let us say that during this manipulating this nonce in the header and also the nonce in the coin base, let's assume that you got this hash value within the specified limit. And then immediately what you do, you put this hash value and you just release the block immediately as soon as possible, right? So because you might have competing blocks and things like that. And then that's how the transaction is done. Okay, let's stop here because we will also look into the hash difficulty. This is a bit complicated calculation. How the hash header or block header hash value is checked against the difficulty, whether it's valid or not, how the miners will do the calculation. So I will walk you through all this calculation and things like that. So this is a bit complicated. We need to understand this a bit better. Okay, any questions?
Thank you, Professor.
I think there is
Students, do you have any questions? I think they are quite busy.
Okay. So then, yeah, let's try to find time in this week or something like that.
Yeah,
We
sure.
will communicate and
Please do tell me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Look at.
Okay. Have a nice day, and then I will stop the recording.